May 1st, 1945. Berlin. The Third Reich had collapsed. Adolf Hitler was dead. His 1,000-year empire had lasted 12 years. Within 24 hours, the men who had stood closest to him, the architects of Nazi policy, the executors of his orders, faced a choice. Some chose suicide. Others chose flight. A few chose surrender. What followed was not a coordinated escape plan, but a fragmented scramble for survival. The fates of Hitler's inner circle would unfold across 3 continents and span 4 decades. This is their documented story. Hitler's inner circle consisted of approximately 15 men who held direct access to the Führer and shaped Reich policy. They included Reich ministers, military commanders, and personal deputies. Joseph Goebbels controlled propaganda. Heinrich Himmler commanded the SS. Hermann Göring led the Luftwaffe. Martin Bormann served as Hitler's private secretary. Albert Speer managed war production. These men, along with others like Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop and Wehrmacht Chief Wilhelm Keitel, formed the core of Nazi leadership. By May 8, 1945, the day Germany surrendered, their collective fate remained uncertain. Allied forces had prepared war crimes tribunals. Intelligence agencies launched manhunts. Resistance movements sought revenge. What happened to each man reveals the mechanisms of post-war justice, the limits of accountability, and the long shadow of the Nazi regime. Some faced execution. Others died by their own hand. A few escaped for decades. Their individual endings were as varied as their crimes were systematic. April 30th, 1945. The Vorbunker, Berlin. Joseph Goebbels, Reich Minister of Propaganda, had remained with Hitler until the end. After Hitler's suicide, Goebbels became Chancellor for one day, a title without power or territory. On May 1st, 1945, at approximately 8:30 p.m., Goebbels and his wife Magda arranged the deaths of their 6 children in the bunker. The children Helga, Hilded, Helmut, Hold, Hedda, and Hyde, ages 4 to 12, were given morphine injections, then administered cyanide capsules. Soviet autopsy reports, declassified in 1992, confirmed cyanide poisoning as cause of death. Minutes later, Joseph and Magda Goebbels walked into the bunker garden. Both took cyanide. An SS adjutant shot each body to ensure death. Their corpses were partially burned with gasoline, but Soviet forces discovered the remains the following day. Soviet archives, opened after 1991, contained photographs and autopsy documentation. The bodies were identified through dental records. Joseph Goebbels' distinctive clubfoot confirmed identification. Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer and architect of the Holocaust, chose a different path. After Hitler expelled him from the Nazi Party on April 29th for attempting secret surrender negotiations, Himmler fled north. For 3 weeks, Himmler moved through Germany disguised as a common soldier, using false papers under the name Heinrich Hitzinger. He shaved his mustache and wore an eye patch. On May 21, 1945, British forces detained him at a checkpoint near Bremen. 2 days later, during a medical examination, Himmler was ordered to open his mouth. He bit down on a cyanide capsule hidden in his teeth. British Army records state he died within 12 minutes. Captain C.J.L. Whittaker, the interrogating officer, filed a report now held at the National Archives in Kew, England. The prisoner collapsed and died before medical assistance could be administered. Within 3 weeks of Hitler's death, 2 of his closest advisors were dead by suicide, but others had already begun to run. Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe and Hitler's designated successor until the final days, surrendered to American forces on May 8, 1945, in Bavaria. He arrived wearing his full dress uniform with medals and carrying a suitcase filled with paracodyne, pills he had been addicted for years. U.S. Army interrogation reports describe Göring as jovial and cooperative initially. He was transferred to Nuremberg for trial in November 1945. The International Military Tribunal charged Göring with conspiracy to wage aggressive war, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The trial lasted from November 20, 1945, to October 1, 1946. Over 400 open sessions produced 16,000 pages of transcript. On October 1, 1946, the tribunal sentenced Göring to death by hanging. The execution was scheduled for October 16th. At 10:45 p.m. on October 15, 1946, 2 hours before his scheduled execution, Göring swallowed a cyanide capsule in his cell. American guards found him dead at 11 p.m. An investigation concluded the capsule had been hidden in his personal effects for months. How it passed through multiple searches remains officially unexplained. Joachim von Ribbentrop, Foreign Minister of Nazi Germany from 1938 to 1945, was captured by British forces in Hamburg on June 14, 1945. He had been hiding in a boarding house under a false name. Ribbentrop was tried at Nuremberg alongside Göring. He was convicted on all 4 counts and sentenced to death. On October 16, 1946, at 1:11 a.m., Ribbentrop became the first Nazi leader executed at Nuremberg. According to witness reports filed with the tribunal, he climbed the gallows steps and stated, "God protect Germany. My last wish is that Germany's unity shall be preserved." The hanging took 14 minutes. U.S. Army photographer accounted the execution was efficient but not instantaneous. All bodies were cremated and ashes were scattered in the Isar River to prevent grave sites from becoming shrines. Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the Wehrmacht High Command, surrendered to Soviet forces in May 1945. He was extradited to Nuremberg and convicted of war crimes, including the murder of prisoners of war and the execution of commando orders. Keitel was hanged at Nuremberg on October 16, 1946, at 1:18 a.m. His final words, recorded in official U.S. Army records, were, "I call on God Almighty to have mercy on the German people." More than 2 million German soldiers went to their death for the fatherland before me. I follow now my sons all for Germany. Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations Staff, was also hanged that night. Ernst Kaltenbrunner, head of Reich Security after Heydrich's death, followed. In total, 10 men were executed at Nuremberg on October 16, 1946, between 1 a.m. and 2:57 a.m. 3 other members of Hitler's inner circle faced different fates at Nuremberg. Rudolf Hess, who had flown to Scotland in 1941 in a bizarre solo peace mission, received life imprisonment. He remained in Spandau Prison, Berlin, until his death by suicide in 1987 at age 93. Albert Speer, Hitler's architect and armaments minister, was sentenced to 20 years at Nuremberg. He admitted general responsibility but claimed ignorance of the Holocaust's full scope. Historians dispute this claim. Speer was released from Spandau in 1966 and died in London in 1981. Karl Dönitz, who Hitler appointed as his successor in his final testament, served 10 years for war crimes related to submarine warfare. He was released in 1956 and died in 1980. Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary and head of the Nazi Party Chancellery, was last seen alive on the night of May 1, 1945, in Berlin. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Bormann attempt to escape the city during the Soviet assault. Hitler Youth leader Arthur Axmann testified he saw Bormann and Hitler's doctor, Ludwig Stumpfegger, dead near the Lager railway station on May 2, 1945. Axmann claimed both had taken cyanide. However, no body was recovered. Bormann was tried in absentia in Nuremberg and sentenced to death. For 27 years, rumors persisted he had escaped to South America. In 1972, construction workers in Berlin unearthed skeletal remains near the Leiter station, exactly where Eichmann had described. Forensic examination matched the skeleton to Bormann's known medical records, including a previous collarbone break. DNA testing in 1998, using a sample from one of Bormann's living relatives, confirmed the identification with near certainty. The West German government officially declared Bormann dead as of May 1945. His remains were cremated and scattered in the Baltic Sea in 1999. Suicide became the chosen exit for many Nazi leaders in April and May 1945. The pattern reflected both fear of capture and adherence to a warped code of honor. Robert Ley, head of the German Labor Front and a member of Hitler's inner circle, was captured by American paratroopers on May 16, 1945. He was transported to Nuremberg to face trial. On October 25, 1945, Ley fashioned a noose from towels in his cell and hanged himself. Guards discovered his body during a routine check. A U.S. Army medical officer pronounced him dead at the scene. Hans Frank, Governor General of occupied Poland and responsible for ghetto operations that led to millions of deaths, attempted suicide at his arrest by slashing his wrists. He survived and was tried at Nuremberg. Frank converted to Catholicism in prison and expressed remorse in his testimony. He was hanged on October 16, 1946. Hermann Göring's suicide, despite constant surveillance, represented perhaps the most significant security failure of the Nuremberg trials. Adolf Eichmann, though not part of Hitler's immediate inner circle, had been a key logistics coordinator of the Holocaust. His fate demonstrates the longest reach of post-war justice. Eichmann was captured by U.S. forces in 1945 but escaped from a detention camp in 1946, using false papers provided by a network of Nazi sympathizers. He fled to Argentina in 1950, settling in Buenos Aires under the name Ricardo Clement. For 10 years, Eichmann lived openly, working in a Mercedes-Benz factory. Israeli intelligence, Mossad, began tracking him in 1957 after receiving a tip from a German prosecutor. On May 11, 1960, Mossad agents abducted Eichmann from a Buenos Aires street as he returned from work. They held him in a safe house for 9 days, then smuggled him to Israel on an El Al flight. Eichmann's trial in Jerusalem lasted from April to December 1961. Over 100 Holocaust survivors testified. The proceedings were filmed, the first major trial recorded for television. The court convicted Eichmann of crimes against humanity, crimes against the Jewish people, and war crimes. He was sentenced to death. On May 31, 1962, Adolf Eichmann was hanged at Ramla prison, the only execution ever carried out by the State of Israel. His body was cremated, and ashes were scattered beyond Israel's territorial waters in the Mediterranean Sea. Not every member of Nazi leadership faced immediate justice. Some were recruited. Klaus Barbie, the Butcher Lion, who had tortured French resistance members, was employed by U.S. Army intelligence in Germany from 1947 to 1951. Declassified U.S. State Department documents from 1983 confirm American agents helped Barbie escape to Bolivia in 1951. He lived there under the name Klaus Altmann until 1983, when French authorities extradited him. Barbie was tried in France, convicted of crimes against humanity, and sentenced to life imprisonment. He died in prison in 1991. Operation Paperclip, a separate U.S. program, recruited German scientists, including some with Nazi Party membership, to work on American aerospace and weapons projects. While not focused on Hitler's inner circle, it demonstrated that post-war priorities sometimes superseded justice. Several high-ranking Nazis successfully fled to South America and died of natural causes, never facing trial. Joseph Mengele, the Auschwitz doctor, escaped to Argentina in 1949, then moved to Paraguay and Brazil. He drowned while swimming off the Brazilian coast in 1979. His remains were exhumed and identified in 1985 through forensic analysis. Franz Stangl, commandant of Treblinka extermination camp, fled to Brazil in 1951. He worked openly in a Volkswagen factory under his real name until his arrest in 1967. Stangl was extradited to West Germany, tried, and convicted of the murder of 900,000 people. He died of heart failure in prison in 1971. These cases demonstrated both the effectiveness of Nazi escape networks, often called Ratlins, and their eventual failure as documentation improved and international cooperation increased. By 1949, 4 years after Hitler's death, most members of his inner circle were dead. 10 had been executed at Nuremberg. Several had committed suicide. A handful remained in prison. But the pursuit did not end. Throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, Nazi hunters continued tracking fugitives. Simon Wiesenthal, himself a Holocaust survivor, dedicated his life to locating war criminals. His Jewish Documentation Center in Vienna processed thousands of tips and archival documents. West Germany established the Central Office of the State Justice Administrations for the investigation of National Socialist crimes in 1958. By 1992, this office had initiated proceedings against more than 106,000 individuals. Approximately 6,500 resulted in convictions. The last major trial of a Hitler associate occurred in 1987, when Klaus Barbie faced French justice. But prosecutions continued into the 21st century for lower-ranking personnel. In 2011, German prosecutors charged John de Mihanyuk, a guard at Sobibor extermination camp, with accessory to murder. He was convicted at age 91, 66 years after the war's end. The fates of Hitler's inner circle established several precedents. The Nuremberg trials created international legal frameworks for prosecuting crimes against humanity. The concept of following orders was rejected as a defense. Individual accountability became a principle of international law. Archives continued to open. In 2000, the Russian government released previously classified documents about the fates of Nazi leaders captured by Soviet forces. These materials confirmed details about Goebbels, Bormann, and others. As of 2025, all members of Hitler's inner circle are confirmed dead. The last survivor was Rojas Misch, Hitler's bodyguard, who died in 2013 at age 96. Misch was never charged with war crimes. The Simon Wiesenthal Center continues to publish an annual list of most wanted Nazi war criminals. As of their 2024 report, fewer than a dozen aging suspects remain alive, all in their late 90s or over 100 years old. What happened to Hitler's closest advisors demonstrates that while some escaped immediate justice, historical accountability proved persistent. Documentation, forensic evidence, and institutional memory outlasted attempts at anonymity. The question was never whether they would face judgment from tribunals, from history, or from their own actions in those final desperate hours. The question was only when and in what form. For Hitler's inner circle, the answer came in execution chambers, in prison cells, on the run in foreign lands, or in the gardens of a Berlin bunker as their world collapsed around them. Justice took many forms. But in every documented case, it eventually came.